Greetings, people of the interwebs. Jake here. So, as you can tell by the title of this video, I don't really care about Star Wars anymore. And it kind of pains me to say that, because as a pretty much lifelong Star Wars fan, ever since I was a little kid, that was one of my favorite movies, as the original trilogy, and then, of course, even the prequels, because that came out, in '99, so I was like 8 when Phantom Menace came out. So, and honestly, even to this day, as an adult, having rewatched the prequels, I realize, yeah, they're not great overall. But I still appreciate the prequels because there's a good story in there. Was it executed that well? No, not really. And as much as I think George Lucas is a kind of visionary genius, like he's great with like big picture, kind of conceptually and all that stuff. Not the best writer, not the best director, even. But basically, to kind of add a little bit of context, I guess also with the release of The Acolyte, to kind of, I guess that was kind of the main reason why I decided to record this. Again, a little bit of context. So obviously, mentioned, been a big Star Wars fan since I was a kid. I remember watching the original trilogy before like the remastered editions. As a kid, loved playing with like the toys and playing make believe with like my siblings and friends, like outside using like sticks as lightsabers and blaster rifles and stuff like that. And Star Wars toys were also some of my favorite as a kid too. And so initially, like, I was kind of optimistic when Disney bought Lucasfilm. Because I'd seen what they had done with Marvel, and, up until really recently, they had done really good with Marvel. But now that it's been several years since The Force Awakens, and since Disney had first bought Lucasfilm, unfortunately, I just don't care anymore. Now, granted, I should mention that I don't hate everything that Disney did with Star Wars. Actually, I think some of the best Star Wars has come from the Disney era, with the two main examples, in my opinion, being Rogue One, which I think is easily one of the best Star Wars movies ever made, and then I would even put it up there with like the original trilogy. It may even be my second favorite Star Wars movie after Empire Strikes Back. That's how good I think Rogue One is. And then, of course, Andor. Andor, I think, is easily the best written Star Wars anything, whether it be movies, TV shows, whatever. And highly underrated, in my opinion. Because even though it did well critically, like a lot of people seem to like it who did watch it, not enough people watch that show, which is a shame. But also part of the reason, I think one of the reasons why it didn't do so well viewership-wise is because a lot of the fan base has become very apathetic, which I'll kind of dive into a little bit more in this video. But yeah, Andor, incredible. And honestly, that was actually a show that I didn't really have much interest in. Because even though I really like Diego Luna as an actor, and I like the character of casting Andor, when that show was first announced, I was like, I don't really know if Andor deserves his own movie. But was so... It was one of those few occasions where I was very happy to be pleasantly surprised and proven wrong. And again, there's been like Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2. I thought I really enjoyed those, and felt very much like Star Wars in spirit and heart, especially of like the original trilogy. But then everything else has just been okay to just outright bad. So I remember I was even kind of hesitant to even watch Mandalorian because I was so disenfranchised after the sequel trilogy. Even though on initial release, I really enjoyed Force Awakens. I think, I'm sure there were reviews still on the channel but yeah, I really enjoyed that movie. Saw it in theaters 3 times, and I can still watch that movie now and enjoy it. But I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a good movie because it's essentially a remake of A New Hope. Like a lot of like almost beat for beat story from A New Hope. Um, and I defended it at the time, and I still could kind of defend it just because that movie it had a lot to do. It had to essentially bring back the fan base because there's a lot of people who hated the prequel trilogy, and understandably so. I totally get why people don't like those movies. And again, part of it I think is just because I grew up around the time that the prequels came out, so I do have a little bit of a soft spot. Objectively, I definitely realize those those are not well made movies, except for Revenge of the Sith. I think that's actually a good movie that gets a little bit of a bad reputation just because kind of lumped in with the prequels. Digressing. But yeah, overall the Disney era has been very hit or miss. And again, the hits have been great. Like again, in my opinion, Rogue One, Andor, phenomenal. Especially Andor. Can't stress enough. What makes that show so great is the fact that you can take all the Star Wars elements out of it. And I think that's actually one of the criticisms people had, is it didn't feel like Star Wars. And I get that, but at the same time, I think for me, that's what made that show so good. Is it's just a really well told story. You can tell that story in any world, whether it be like real world or it could have easily been like another like dystopian future scenario, and that story still works. Take the Star Wars elements out of it, and it works. But I think that's also the key to telling a good story. And I'll use an example. Is in what I think is the best Marvel movie, and is my favorite Marvel movie, is Captain America: The Winter Soldier, because you can take all the superhero Marvel elements out of that movie, and that story still works. So you can put that as just a standalone story of like a spy espionage thriller. That story still works. Same thing with Andor, and even to a lesser extent with Rogue One. But again, I think the highs are really high in the Disney era Star Wars, but the lows are so low. Like, no pun intended. Just now realized it's so low. Which honestly, a lot of times I forget about that movie. It's not even a terrible movie; it's just very forgettable. So again, Force Awakens, it's enjoyable, but it's not great. And then you have Last Jedi, which I remember watching that movie the first time. It's the only time I can remember watching a movie in theaters and thinking to myself about midway through, I don't know if I like this movie. Which is a horrible feeling to feel with any movie, regardless of whether it's like one of your favorite franchises of all time, or just a movie you decided to go watch because, the trailers look promising. But it was definitely a lot more impactful because, as a lifelong Star Wars fan, I wanted nothing more than to love everything Star Wars. But yeah, Last Jedi, that was definitely the turning point for me. Again, there's still some cool moments. Like, I think on a technical level, The Last Jedi is actually one of the best Star Wars movies ever made, which sounds weird. But it really does have, it's got some really good acting. It does have some really cool scenes, even though a lot of those scenes are kind of dumb. Like when Holdo puts it on autopilot, and like that really beautiful visual scene of like her flying through those not Empire, whatever they're called, the new Empire in the sequels. I can't even bother to remember their name. Flies through that ship. That was a pretty badass scene. Also really dumb, because if she could do autopilot, why did... I'm going to stop. Otherwise, I'm just going to go into like a very long tirade on the many flaws with The Last Jedi. But yeah, so Last Jedi was definitely the turning point, and then of course The Rise of Skywalker was... Again, there are a couple cool scenes, but overall that movie was not good. And it just showed that there was no plan for the sequel trilogy. Like, Kathleen Kennedy was just kind of like, hey, you get a Star Wars movie, and you get a Star Wars movie, just make movies, I guess. Like, there was no... Because again, as flawed as the prequels are, there's still a clear, connective thread, like a narrative there throughout the prequel trilogy. Whereas the sequels were just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what stuck, and that's still kind of what Star Wars has been doing. But again, with Mandalorian season one, that's why I was kind of apprehensive to watch it, because I was pretty checked out of the franchise after the Rise of Skywalker, because that movie was just not good. I've only seen it once. Every other Star Wars movie, again, even Last Jedi, I've seen twice. Because the second time I took my dad to go see it, because that was part of our tradition with the new Star Wars movies. I would always take him to go, like, took him to go see Force Awakens, took him to go see Rogue One, took him to go see Last Jedi, and also I did want to watch The Last Jedi a second time just to kind of, I don't know, I guess kind of like really compartmentalize my thoughts and see if I really didn't like the movie, or if maybe it was like some of the kind of subversive scenes of that movie on my initial watching kind of took me out of it. So I was kind of curious if a second viewing, now that I knew what to expect, would improve my viewing. And I think initially it kind of helped, but then the more I thought about it, I'm like, no, this movie's just not for me. But yeah, so I was kind of hesitant to watch Mandalorian, but a lot of people really loved it and kept recommending it to me. So I did, and again, I really liked it. I enjoyed it. A lot of fun. And then season 2, really enjoyed, especially that last episode with Luke. That's what Luke should have been in the sequel trilogy. So that was great to see. But then after Mandalorian season 2, which kind of won me back over, and I was willing to, like, basically just watch anything Star Wars after that. Any TV show, any movie afterwards. But then they did Book of Boba Fett, which was pretty bad. Like, the best episodes in that show were with the episodes with Mandalorian. And then they followed that up with Obi-Wan, which was complete dog shit. Awful. Awful show. Terrible writing. And that's the biggest problem with, really, Disney as a whole. Is terrible writing with a lot of their franchises. But yeah, Obi-Wan was terrible. Didn't need to be made. Horrible. Hated it. And then season 3 of Mandalorian, I forget if that came out. Yeah, I think that came out before Ahsoka. But yeah, season 3 of Mandalorian was just a mess. Ahsoka was bland, boring, and just very forgettable. Ray Stevenson's really the only highlight from that show. And I also really like the actress, her name escapes me, the actress who played Shin Hati. Those two characters are the only ones that really had any kind of personality or really anything going for them. Everyone else was just they're just very bland. Like, Ahsoka's an incredibly forgettable show. And then, what other shows were there outside of Andor? Because Andor was great. I don't know. But again, I guess that just kind of goes to show how forgettable Star Wars has been lately. And it's the most frustrating thing for me, who used to be a huge fan of this franchise and would defend it, because again, I'll still defend the prequels to an extent. But yeah, I don't know. I can only deal with so much, like, mediocrity and just so much bad, like, poorly written movies and shows that I just don't care anymore. Like, The Acolyte, a part of me is morbidly curious to watch it, just because I've heard pretty much nothing but bad things. But there's only so much time in the day that I have. I don't think I want to spend it watching a show that I'll probably end up hating. And if it does end up being great, yeah, maybe I'll give it a go. But at this point, I just don't care anymore. Like, all the movies that have been announced, none of them have happened. Even the Rey movie that's supposed to happen, I don't know. I really don't know if that movie will even happen. Then Mandalorian Season 4, which is maybe going to be a movie, or maybe it's still going to be Season 4. There doesn't seem to be any real consistency or plan with Lucasfilm anymore. Or, well, anymore. That implies that there's a plan to begin with. Um, but yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the things that's killed this franchise is there was never a plan, nor does there seem to be much of a plan now. And it also blows my mind that like Lucasfilm has not made a profit since Disney bought Lucasfilm for like a little over $4 billion. Um, Blows my mind because even though The Force Awakens is like one of the highest grossing films ever made, just poor management, they still have not made any profit because of like all the money they've invested in the franchise. So yeah, I don't know, man. Like, there really isn't anything in Lucasfilm like that they've announced or that's even tentative that gets me even remotely intrigued. Because I'm really not excited about anything anymore. Like, there are very few things that get me excited these days with like movies or TV shows. At least in based on like a lot of my what used to be some of my favorite franchises. Um, but especially Star Wars. There's just even if they did like an Old Republic TV series where they could really flesh out like that time period and like a lot of those characters, I don't think I could get excited about that because they haven't proven that they could handle like good writing or execution of stories. Because they're nuggets of good stuff in like Ahsoka and Book of Boba Fett and stuff like that, where it's like, yeah, had they executed that right, or like Boba Fett should have been like a gangster show, like that should have like really delved deep into like the underworld of the Star Wars universe, and Ahsoka kind of running off like the popularity of Rebels should have also been a hit, but that show wasn't very good. And then of course the sequels again, not having a plan for that just really killed the franchise. And so I don't really know what Star Wars is anymore. Like I think that's part of the problem is there's an identity crisis where Star Wars doesn't really know who it wants to appeal to or what sort of stories to tell in its universe. I think that's I don't know because I feel like a universe as vast as Star Wars, there's really no limits to what kind of stories you can tell. And I think actually one thing that could benefit the franchise is if they actually scaled down a little bit. Like for example, if someone wanted to tell like a horror story in Star Wars, make like a horror Star Wars movie for like I don't know $20 million. That would actually intrigue me because they're taking risks and also ironically like risks story wise, but ironically less risks financially because pretty much anything Star Wars has to be like a minimum of it seems like of $200 million. But I think that might be one of the only things that could bring this franchise back is by basically swinging for the fences, but taking smaller financial risks, but like swinging for the fences, like maybe creatively. Like I don't know, do a romantic comedy in the Star Wars universe. I don't know how appealing that would be, but at least try something new and move away from the Skywalker saga. Because I think that's another thing too. Is like move away from the Skywalkers, tell new stories with new characters, new planets. Because I'm kind of getting tired of seeing Tatooine every time. Like I swear to God, if I see Tatooine again in another movie or show, I'm gonna build a Death Star and I'm gonna blow up Tatooine. I don't give a shit about Tatooine anymore. And any other desert planets like Jakku, that's Tatooine, like Tatooine 2.0. I'll blow that planet up too. That's a universe, a whole massive universe. Show us more planets. Stop having all these characters know each other. Just tell brand new stories, new characters, not affiliated with the Skywalker story, not affiliated with like the sequel trilogy, prequels, original trilogy, anything like that. Just new stuff and try to be innovative, like the original trilogy was, like the sequels were, where they were pioneering new technology, new ideas. Definitely more technology than ideas, but still, they were very innovative. And that was one thing too with the sequels is there was no real new innovations implemented in the sequel trilogy. Admittedly, that's a bit more of a nitpick than anything else, but even still. Um, but yeah, so that kind of, I think that kind of wraps up my very rambly video, as I typically do, on why I just don't care about Star Wars anymore. I would love nothing more than to love Star Wars again. Again, like if the Acolyte, by the time that show finishes and it becomes like highly regarded, well reviewed, and stuff like that, I might check it out and again hope for the best. But my expectations are pretty much rock bottom. I really don't have any high. I really don't have any expectations at all for this show, or high hopes at all for Star Wars going forward. I think really the only thing to improve the franchise is just like purge the company of like all the like higher echelon of creatives, like not just Kathleen Kennedy, but like just purge the company of most of the creatives involved. Start fresh, like essentially just burn it all down and start build it up from scratch, and hopefully it'll be like a phoenix rising from the ashes and renew itself instead of just floundering about and basically just being on life support is what Star Wars is right now. But anyways, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up before I keep rambling. So give me your thoughts below on your thoughts on the Star Wars franchise. Are you still a fan? Do you hate it? Are you apathetic like me? Is the Acolyte worth watching? If it is, I might actually watch it and review it at the end. Or if it's not worth watching, then I'm not gonna bother and spend my free time doing more important things, stuff that I actually enjoy, because time is short, people. So until next time, everyone, cheers.